Right.
All right, good evening, everybody. Today is December 1st, 2021. Hard to believe it's December. This is the Oregon City regular City Commission meeting, and I'm calling this meeting to order. Mr. Wiley, will you please call the roll?
Commissioner Denise McGriff.
Present.
Commissioner Rocky Smith.
Here.
Commissioner Adam Morrow.
Here.
Commissioner Frank O'Donnell.
Here.
And Mayor Rachel Smith.
Here. Will you all please join me and stand for the flag salute? Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, so looking at the agenda, we do not have any ceremonies and proclamations for this evening. We'll move to citizen comments. We do have one citizen comment. Ms. Karen Maury.
Can we hear me?
Oh, there she is.
Yes, we can hear you. So your name and city of residence for the record, and then you'll have 3 minutes.
All right, this is a general comment. It actually does bridge 2 agenda items, but additional information. Hello, I'm Karen Maury, a resident of Oregon City. I am a member of the Parks and Recreation Advisory Committee, but I am speaking only on my own behalf, not on behalf of the committee. On October 14th, I received an email message from Kristen Brown, the Community Communications Coordinator for the City of Oregon City, titled "This Message Sent on Behalf of Mayor Rachel Smith." It gave new information on how committee members would be interviewed and appointed. I'm not sure what it was. Was that a change order, a declaration, an edict? I'm not aware of any mayor previously taking unilateral action to make a change to a process close to when it needs to be dealt with. I understand from the last work session that the other commissioners were not aware that this change was occurring. One of the problems with PRAC, we have 9 members plus an opening for a high school student that we've never filled. We currently have 5 members that will be continuing on. There will be 4 new members, which means in January, we will be meeting for the first time with 4 people we know nothing about and electing a chair and co-chair for the following year and moving ahead as a team. The ability for the existing committees to do the interviews is important to those committees, and I understand from the mayor's comments at the work session that this was more directed at the Historic Review Board and the Planning Commission. But I hope that this is something that is dealt with tonight and maybe reconsidered. I thank Mr. Kabaisman. I like his comment that the process is provided by the rules of the commission, which really don't seem to exist. Secondly, watching that meeting plus other meetings lately as I'm doing catch-ups, I am constantly hearing members of the commission and the mayor saying, well, this should go to a vote of the people. This should go to a vote of the people. And thank you to Mr. Conkle, who tries to clarify the difference between code and charter. We do need some code changes. One of these is looking at all of the city commissions or committees and commissions to come up with a consistent format for how many absences you can have, how to remove somebody, how to resign, how do they adopt the city goals. We have committees that are still allowed to create their own goals and bylaws. And that makes no sense to me, but that then leads to the other issue. We do need to update our charter. And honestly, I thought we had made some changes in the charter, and I agree that I honestly thought that we had adopted general neutral language, and I had to call Nancy Ide. Just tell me, wait a minute, I know we talked about this, didn't we do it? No, we didn't. And
Ms. Maury, you're way over your 3 minutes, so I'm going to have to interrupt you.
Can I have 30 seconds?
Can she
Can I have 30 seconds?
No, I'd like to follow up with you. I'm happy to follow up with you one-on-one on the memo that was sent out regarding the process for committee appointments. And if you have any additional comments, I think this commission is certainly open to some suggestions. We've all recognized that we need to improve some of our rules and the language in our codes. The work session was the first opportunity we had to kind of talk about that. So thanks for your comments tonight.
Thank you.
All right, our next public comment is from Ms. Betty Mum.
Good evening, Betty Mum, citizen of Oregon City. At your work session, talking about charter amendments and all that, I printed out my statement and then I left it at work, so I have a bunch of scrap. So, I agree with Commissioner McGriff on the appointments to Planning Commission and HRB should be a charter. It should not be a charter. It should be in the municipal code because that's where it's at. And it would take 3 out of 5 to change it, which is going to be better. And it's spelled out clearly in the code how it is to be perceived. So term limits, I think, are very important because it gives younger generations the opportunity to come up and be leaders. And it's, we do have mayor for life people. And you might want to check with City of Gladstone, City of Tualatin, because in 2016, the voters voted for term limits, which eliminated the 2 mayors that were in office 20 plus years. And they were able to make a pretty good war chest, so it was not easy to defeat them at the ballot. It was a monopoly that they were with their city, and it wasn't fair. So I strongly would suggest we leave term limits in. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Made and seconded. Mr. Wiley?
Commissioner Denise McGriff.
And I also want to thank you for the excellent minutes again. They were very thorough. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Rocky Smith.
Aye.
Commissioner Adam Marl.
Aye.
Commissioner Frank O'Donnell.
Aye.
And Mayor Rachel L. Smith.
Aye.
Motion passes.
All right. Moving right along, we're going to move to our public hearings section. We have one public hearing tonight, and this is the first reading of Ordinance 21-1014, GLUA 21-00057, and LEG 21-00004, legislative application for housing needs analysis. Ms. Christina Robertson Gardner.
Thank you, Mayor L. Smith. Commissioners, I'm back. The housing needs analysis is a technical document that will be used by the city as we move forward with a comprehensive plan update to look at, does the city have we zoned it properly? Do we have enough land for housing expectations for the city? At the last meeting on November 17th, you had some questions that staff was not able to answer. We provided those to Beth Goodman, our consultant who helped prepare this document. In your packet, you'll have an email from Beth with answers to those questions, as well as a revised redline version of the housing needs analysis. Beth is available this evening via Zoom if you have any questions for her, as well as if you have any questions for me. So I will pass it over to Beth.
Christina, would you like me to go through the questions one by one?
I might defer to the city commissioners if that would be helpful for you. Okay, yes,
sure.
Please do, Beth.
Okay, so the first question was about in the executive summary. It was a question about some language about housing needs relating to race. And that was based on information that was less specific to Oregon City and more specific to Clackamas County, to the state, out of some other analysis we did. And that information wasn't necessary in the housing needs, so we simply struck it. Since we didn't provide fact-based specific to Oregon City in here.
Beth, can you just stop right there?
Yes, ma'am.
I didn't have any problem leaving it in as long as you clarified it the way that you specified. I mean, I think it's an interesting fact.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the concern that both Mayor Lyle-Smith and I expressed was that it was kind of calling out one group versus the other group.
Sure.
But I think it's okay to leave it in as long as you qualify it by saying what you just said, which is it pertains more to Clackamas County generally, and obviously Oregon City is a subset jurisdiction within Clackamas County. So, I mean, I think it's okay, but the way it was written, it was not clear where that data came from.
Certainly, and I would say, I mean, we can leave it in, we can take it out, whatever your preference is. I think it's also covered if in less specificity in the housing needs analysis. I think it's fine either way, whichever you prefer.
Oh, I don't like leaving it how it is because I don't think it reads grammatically correct. So it either needs to be rewritten or removed. So I like the idea of removing it because it fixed the grammatical piece where it didn't make sense the way it was read, or the way it was originally written. So.
I think there's no problems with removing it.
Other than that page, or two, whatever that is, would just start with the bullet point that says housing affordability is a growing challenge, yada, yada, in Oregon City.
No, it just removed the very last tag of the sentence above.
The last tag. Okay.
Right after the word population, they added an and. You should look at the red line copy. Yeah. They put a period after the word population and added a word and before or after Z.
Does anybody have any further comments on that?
I'm just curious about why it's specifically singling out the Latino population. I think that's kind of what we were getting at with the whole people of color thing as well, was that it isn't just a people of color issue. And just getting back, this one is even more specific. So I'm just curious why that specificity, and are they the only growing ethnic group in Oregon City?
So Latino is the fastest growing group, generally speaking, in Oregon City and in many cities in Oregon. Just like you've got the aging of the millennials and Generation Z coming into their own households, the aging of the boomers, these are our large demographic trends. And so what we're talking about here is just specific key demographic trends. And so that's what we're capturing in this bullet point. And growth of the Latino population is one of the key demographic trends.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. There's lots of other things going on. The report has a lot of information about other demographic trends, but it's not trying to be comprehensive of all possible.
Would the commission feel more comfortable striking that entire bullet and removing it as a way to mediate this situation, or are we happy leaving it?
Well, Mayor Lyle-Smith, I still think that it needs to be noted that demographically that is a growing population. And I was speaking earlier with Commissioner Morrow, and when we did our housing strategy, I can't think of the name of the consultant now, it was a couple of years ago, in terms of Travel Oregon and travel and tourism dollars being spent, that population was shown with data that is a growing population, not only in Oregon City, but in our state, and that there is an opportunity to attract people from those particular ethnic groups to our community for tourism. So to me, those two documents kind of link up together. The demographic information is confirming what we talked about in the tourism strategy, and this is now saying, okay, in this situation, this is also something that we need to pay attention to. I think the point that I was trying to make last time when I was concurring with Mayor Lyle-Smith was that we know that we have particular populations where housing is a problem. Across the board, it applies to people of color, but it also applies to just about everyone. I think what they were trying to emphasize was that these particular populations are more affected, but overall, there is a housing issue with everybody, no matter what their race or ethnicity is. And I was hoping that somehow that was going to be reworded so that that was brought to bear, that yes, these are affected populations, but it's really a broader issue.
And we get at that issue, that point in bullet number 2, that housing affordability, broadly speaking, is a growing challenge in Oregon City. And we talk about how it's a growing challenge in the metro region and how Oregon City is affected there. And there's a lot of information in the housing needs analysis about housing affordability that talks about all population, as well as, in some cases, some more detailed information about certain populations. What we could do
I guess what I'm saying is I'm not wanting to totally shy away from honing in on communities of color.
May I share my screen with a possible edit that may well address your concerns?
Sure.
Give me just a second.
Okay, thank you. I was going to say I just need to be allowed to.
Should be able to now.
Thank you so much. So what I've done here is left and the continued growth of the Latinx population and other communities of color. And that way I'm covering both issues in a grammatically correct way.
Parallel Smith, I'm okay with as long as you feel grammatically the sentence is reading better.
Yeah, it's better because it's reading like a trend versus a tacked on statement that wasn't a trend.
It's more balanced now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it looks good. And I just to be clear, I didn't have any problem with the inclusion of people of color or the Latinx community. I just was looking for clarification there, and I appreciate that, and I think this looks good.
Okay, any other comments on this one? All right, I think we're good. Thanks, Beth. If you want to move on to the next question.
I will. So the next question took me a few minutes to unravel. And so I helped write the report. So if you go to Exhibit 21, which is page 37 in the Housing Needs Analysis report, what we're showing here is Metro's forecast of population growth for the Oregon City limits. And so that's for 9,852 new people in the city between 2021 and 2041. And then the question was, Well, that doesn't make sense when we look at the forecast for new dwelling units in Exhibit 60. And so if we go to Exhibit 60 on page 65, what Exhibit 60 is showing, may I share my screen again, if that's okay?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. What Exhibit 60 is showing is new dwelling units forecast by Metro from 2021 to 2041 within the city limits, within the, what we call them our UGB areas, and then within the total planning area. So we're looking at 5,792 new dwelling units in the city limits and 7,400 in the entire UGB area. And give me one moment to get up a map that will describe to you the difference between the city limits and the UGB area. I should have brought that up before I started, so I apologize for that, but I'll have it here in a moment. And so the geographic difference between those areas, the city limits is everything within this dotted blue line. So all over here is in the city limits. In the urban growth boundary area, so this is an area that the city is expected to annex eventually into the city, and you've got the Park Place concept plan there. More specifically over here, the South End concept plan. This is outside the city limits, but within the urban growth management area. And then the Beaver Creek Road concept plan areas. And so what we're showing here, since we're looking at buildable lands, places where you could develop in outside the city limits, but within the urban growth management area where you've done concept planning, we needed to make sure that we are also looking for the forecast of new housing in those areas. So city limits plus UGB is what we call the Oregon City Planning Area. In Exhibit 21, we're just looking at the city limits. We talked to Metro and said, hey, Metro, can we get a population forecast for those other areas that they're urban growth, the UGB areas? And Metro said, no, we haven't. We don't have population allocated specifically to those areas, but we do have new dwelling units. So we couldn't give you a table here that would match Exhibit 60 exactly. So what we did instead is wrote a big long footnote explaining the issue.
I think footnotes are good.
Yes, and we're very good at writing long footnotes. So the issue is that you just can't compare the total forecast for new dwellings for the whole city, including those areas outside the city limits, with the forecast for population for just the city limits, because they're not apples and oranges.
All right, any questions for Beth on this? Okay. Were there more questions other than those two? I don't recall.
There were two more questions.
Two more, okay.
So one of the questions was, is there an assumption projected about renter and owner occupied housing? Why is it included and why is it not included? So there's not an assumption about future renter owner and renter occupancy. One of the reasons is we're not required to do that kind of forecast, and sometimes it's not very helpful to do that kind of forecast, in part because it's a set of assumptions on top of other assumptions. And the more you build assumptions onto each other, the more opportunities you have to be wrong. One of the things I'd say is it's really early to know how things like House Bill 2001, missing middle housing, is going to affect ownership and renter opportunities for these, smaller types of multifamily housing. And so rather than attempting to make assumptions that may be unfounded, we don't make assumptions about that. if there's any questions about that.
I'm not seeing any, so you can continue to the next question.
Okay, so one of the questions, the last question was, do we have standard how to use this document over time language? Will the city be limited in its policy choices by the housing needs analysis for the next 20 years? I understand why this question was asked, in part because the city hasn't updated its housing needs analysis since 2002. Well, because of House Bill 2003, the city won't have that choice anymore. The city will be required to update its housing needs analysis every 6 years, which is standard for cities within the Metro UGB. So I believe that means your next housing needs analysis will plan for the 2027 to 47 period, and it will be required to be done by December 31st, 2027. What we did do is on page 1, add a little bit more information. I'll share my screen again about about this fact, and the fact that Oregon City will be required to update its analysis in 6 years. And those requirements are in OAR 660-008. And the information in the report is intended to provide Oregon City with a factual basis for updating its housing element of the city's comprehensive plan. So it gives you a new factual basis. And those were the questions that I had, but I'm happy to answer any other questions if you have more.
Yes, I did. I want to thank the staff for allowing for, I finally, as I explained to Christina Robertson Gardner, I finally got through this whole thing. So I will say that one of the frustrating things had to do with some formatting. So when I'm was reading through this, and I get to a topic area where it says exhibit whatever the number is, and then I find that the exhibit is on a different page, so I'm having to go back and forth to try to figure out how the words and the exhibit go together, which I thought was really confusing. So I don't know if anybody else had that problem, but I noticed it as I was going through this. So we're talking, so for instance, like on page 71, you're talking about exhibit 64, and there it is right there. But then you get to further parts of this document where you're talking about other exhibit numbers, and it's on either the head of the page or it's behind the page. And, going back and forth, which is, I think, why it took me so long to read this, because, so example, 68, you talk about exhibit 62, and then you say exhibit 62 shows X, and then I go to the next page, and there's exhibit 62, but then I got to go back to the language to understand what exhibit 62 is saying. So I don't know if that's something that anybody else encountered, or it may just be me. But that was through the entire document where the exhibits and the wordage didn't kind of match up, and again, going back and forth, and I think that's why it took me so long to get through this.
Well, ma'am, there's a lot of information in this.
I get it.
And in the example you gave of exhibit 62, including the footnote that I've got on that page, even if I wasn't including the footnote, it's likely that I wouldn't be able to include all of the language for exhibit 62 on the same page. Exhibit 61 is an even better example of that. All the verbiage about exhibit 61 covers the majority of a page. And then we can get exhibit 61 on there. So wherever we put the exhibits, in some cases, you'd have that problem.
I understand that. Maybe there's a way to say when you get to an exhibit, if the verbiage isn't, it's like on the next page, so that, anyway, it was just a matter of trying to, this is very complicated information, and,
yes.
I thought that I knew what I was reading. I can tell you I did not. And so it took me a couple of passes at this, which is why it took me as long as it did. Because I really wanted to be responsible and respond to staff who's asked us to read this, and it just took time.
I won't disagree that these are packed documents with a lot of information in them. I fully concur.
All right, any other questions? All right, seeing none, I'm going to open the public hearing. Mr. Riley, do we have any public testimony?
No.
All right, seeing none, I'm going to close the public hearing.
I think the public's going to have a really, quite a time digesting this.
Yeah, unfortunately, these reports a lot of times aren't intended for public consumption. They're required for people with planning degrees and master's degrees, and
Didn't help.
I believe you, I understand.
It didn't help, I can tell you that.
Yeah, all right, so do we have a motion regarding this first reading of the ordinance with the changes that were displayed on the screen on page II? I don't know if that's sufficient. It's probably not a sufficient enough motion. Mr. Gebeisman, do we need to be more direct on that language?
Probably would be better to read that language. And, this gets to one of the issues we often have about changing ordinances. I do think this isn't a situation where you have to read the entire section of the ordinance, because there'd have to be a substantial difference. And, while this is an important topic, the changes were more grammatical than substantive. But just to make sure that everybody knows the language that is actually being adopted, we should probably read that section that we're changing it to. And if Ms. Goodman.
Yeah, Ms. Goodman, I think you'll have to put that slide or that document back up. How much do we need to read into the record?
I think just the last sentence. So,
Or maybe that bullet?
Start with key demographics.
why don't we just do the whole bullet? And the change that's being made is on page
It's II.
in the executive summary. And what it says is demographic and economic trends will drive demand for affordable and diverse
Before you get
housing.
started, I don't think we've had a motion in a second yet. Do you want to read that after?
Sure, why don't we have the motion?
Yeah, this is just to make sure we get the motion correct and make sure so would you like us to read that into the motion, or you're going to read it in your part?
Yeah, I'll just read it in my part and just
Okay.
motion with the change.
Okay. Clear as mud, we get a motion? Or would you like me to make a motion? Okay, so I'm gonna move the approval of the first reading of ordinance number 21-1014 and GLUA 21-00057 and LEG 21-00004, amending page II that will be read into the record by our attorney, Mr. Gebeisman.
Typically, the chair of the meeting doesn't have the ability to make a motion.
So moved.
Thank you, Commissioner Smith. Do we have a second?
Second.
I was trying to help our silent commission that doesn't like to make motions.
I appreciate
All right, we have a motion and a second. Mr. Wiley.
it.
Oh, wait, sorry. We'll eventually get there. Mr. Gebeisman.
Ordinance number 21-1014, an ordinance of the City of Oregon City, amending the Oregon City Comprehensive Plan by repealing a 2002 housing study and replacing it with a 2021 housing needs analysis as an ancillary document, with the change to the first paragraph on page 2i to read as follows. Demographic and economic trends will drive demand for affordable and diverse housing in Oregon City. Key demographic and economic trends affecting Oregon City's future housing needs are the aging of the baby boomers, the aging of the millennials and Generation Z, and the continued growth in the Latinx population and other communities of color.
All right, Mr. Wiley, can you please call the vote?
Commissioner Denise McGriff,
Reluctantly voting aye.
Commissioner Rocky Smith,
Aye.
Commissioner Adam Marl,
Aye.
Commissioner Frank O'Donnell,
No.
and Mayor Rachel Lau Smith.
Aye.
Motion passes.
All right, so,
Can I change my vote?
By law, anybody that votes in the affirmative. I think anybody that votes in the affirmative can change their vote. I believe that's Robert's Rules of Order.
yeah, and I think if, as long as it's within, I think the meeting in which the vote is held, it can be changed. Do we need, can she just declare, do you know?
I think a declaration that she changes vote from what to what, and then have the city recorder announce the results of the vote.
Okay, well, I'm going to, as I said, was reluctantly voting yes, but I now want to vote no. And it's not because I don't believe in the work. I think the work is necessary. I don't like how we got here.
All right.
So I've recorded your change of vote
Yes.
and published it on the TV here.
Thank you.
All right, and the motion passes. All right, so this second reading will come back to us at our next regular city commission meeting, December 15th.
Correct.
All right, thank you, Ms. Goodman.
I also want to thank Christina Robertson Gardner for picking this up. Thank you very much. You did a great job in pinch hitting, and I appreciate it. And thank you for answering all my questions.
All right, so we're going to move on to general business. Item number 9A is officially adopting the name of the Hazel Grove Park for the park informally named as Filbert Run Park. Mr. Reed, are you going to present this to us?
I will be introducing Brett Haverkamp. He's part of the Parks and Recreation Advisory Committee, and he's also the chair of the naming committee. Brett?
Okay.
He's the chair of the what?
The naming committee.
Oh, the naming committee, sorry.
Former naming committee, I hope.
Sorry, you're on for life now.
All right.
Good evening, everybody. As the agenda states, we would like to propose the formerly named Filbert Run Park officially have the name adopted to Hazel Grove Park. And to give a little bit of background, the committee met a number of times, and it consisted of 2 members of the Citizen Involvement Committee, 2 members from the Parks and Recreation Advisory Committee, the director, Kendall Reed, as well as representatives from the Neighborhood Association. And that included 4 residents who live adjacent to the park area. So through our series of meetings, it was very important that we, how do I say this, decided upon the public engagement process. And we decided to go ahead and came up with, for our public outreach, and included postings on the city's website, Facebook and Instagram, postings in the Oregon City newsletter that reaches the 12,000 residents. A flyer was sent to the CIC and the Neighborhood Association chair, and a letter was submitted to the Oregon City News and Pamphlet Media, and there was also a direct mailer postcard that was sent to 164 neighbors of the park. So this was our public involvement in process. The survey went live on September 14th. We closed, and then it closed on October 6th, and mailers were sent around September 20th through the 24th. Once we gathered all the information, we met on October 12th to review the naming suggestions, and we chose the final name. So out of all the names, there were over 52 names submitted. Some of them were oddball names, some of them were kind of goofball names. You get these in surveys. But 27 suggestions were a variation of Filbert Run, Hazelnut, or Hazel Grove, and almost 57% of the respondents were from the Hazel Grove Westling Farm neighborhood area. So after meeting and after looking at the naming parameters, the committee came to the consensus of Hazel Grove Park, and we felt it honored the neighborhood and their wishes, and that is why we would like to move forward with the name of Hazel Grove Park.
All right, are there any questions?
Yes, please, I have a question. So was there any historical research done? Because obviously, if you haven't lived here as long as I have, most people don't know or didn't know that a lot of that used to be Filbert orchards. And
Yes.
There were a number of families that were associated with those properties.
There was some historical research done, and it was actually quite fascinating. Like, I didn't know that area was called Twilight down in that area. And some of the naming suggestions were Twilight, but the committee felt like it kind of had a spin feeling of the movie, and it would kind of spin off in that direction.
Might have some vampire
So there was
happening.
historical research done.
Did those subdivisions?
Yeah. The Twilight?
Yeah, when I worked for the city, I was a part of the staff that processed some of those subdivisions. And again, there were a number of, I would say, old Oregon City families or families from that area outside of the city limits before they were brought in that, you know, when I was looking at some of the survey stuff, I thought, well, you know, but maybe that'll be a project that I'm going to have in the future to have a little plaque there for Mr. Fensky, who owned a lot of what became Hazel Grove Westling Farms neighborhood. He had a very lovely orchard.
There was an idea to put a plaque up to some of the neighborhood residents, maybe at a later time, that did put in the elbow grease to maintain that property. So, but that could be considered at another time.
Good.
I'll approve, or I'll make a motion to approve the official adopting of the name Hazel Grove Park.
Second.
And just to be clear, that's resolution number 21-57.
Yeah, it somehow didn't get on the agenda as that resolution, so, but it's in the document.
Yeah.
All right, motion's been made and seconded. Mr. Wiley?
Commissioner Janice McGriff?
Aye.
Commissioner Rocky Smith?
Aye.
Commissioner Adam Morrow?
Aye.
Commissioner Frank O'Donnell?
Aye.
Mayor Rachel Lau Smith?
Aye.
Motion passes.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming in and for your work on the naming committee. That's great.
Absolutely, with pleasure.
That'd be interesting. Weird.
All right, so now we are moving on to item 9B. This is also a resolution adjusting the solid waste collection disposal rates effective February 1st. Do we have Mr. Lewis or Dante, Mr. Posadas?
Yes, we do. We have Dante Posadas in the house tonight, so he's going to do most of the presentation for us. It's been a while since you've heard from Dante, but he does a range of things, one of which is overseeing a lot of our franchise agreements. And so he's kind of taken the here, and we've also got Pam Bloom and Alan Bushy from B&B here, so I don't know if they're not stepping right up, but they're welcome to step right up. So Dante, take the lead here.
Okay.
So good evening, City Commission. Thanks for having us. Like John said, I'm Dante Posadas. I'm the right-of-way and construction manager. And we have Pam Bloom and Alan Bushy with us tonight from B&B Leasing. Tonight we'll be discussing an adjustment to the solid waste and disposal, or the solid waste collection and disposal rates. And I'm going to begin with some history and go from there. So a little bit about solid waste regulation in Oregon City. Our municipal code establishes a franchise. It establishes in Title 8 of our municipal code. The franchise was established with B&B Leasing in 2006. And from then, we've established conditions in our municipal code and outlines how we get regulated and the regulations that we abide by. Municipal code also establishes the rates that, or establishes the parameters, how we establish rates. And the state legislation that applies to our solid waste code is Oregon Revised Statute 459 and 458. And over the regional area, Metro and the counties work together the counties and cities work together to establish a regional waste plan that we have to establish programs through that affect rates. Next slide. So this is a slide about the parameters that we use to establish the rates. It's outlined in city code. Generally, it's cost of services, anticipated services, equipment, reasonable rate of return, comparable rates to other cities, local wages, recycling profits. But historically, the city has established rates beginning in 1997, and our latest establishment of rates was in 2018, and Exhibit B was attached to your staff report on that. So our next slide is the actual proposed rate that we're coming to you tonight with. It's a 5.75 rate adjustment to our residential users. The commercial users have a little bit of a different scale, but generally for a commercial cart, it's still a 5.75. For commercial yards, it's a little bit different of a rate. And here's a little outline of how we, Oregon City, aligns with the other cities in the metro area. As you can see, it's a fairly good rate. And just for other information, the 5.75 is broken down. It's a 3.8 disposal fee adjustment, an 8.5 labor fee adjustment, an 8.88 short fee adjustment, and a 0.22 franchise fee adjustment. So with that being said, these are reasons why we are asking, or B&B Leasing is asking for the rate adjustment, and city staff has reviewed that. The Metro disposal fee has increased 18% since 2018. That's what they charge at the transfer station, Metro South, per ton. Labor cost, as everybody knows, has gone up since 2018. And just an average of our consumer price index of the Portland West consumer price index is at 2.8% per year. And you guys know that just lately the inflation rate has gone up quite a bit. So those are all rate adjustment reasons that we're considering. Next slide. And this is a slide about upcoming services. The city works with Clackamas County and our franchise hauler to keep in the regulation that's set by Metro and the state. We are looking at how to dispose of different other solid waste items such as styrofoam, batteries, clothing, and electronics. And also this year, we will be implementing what was passed last year with Ordinance 1004 with Group 1 for business food waste separation in an effort to minimize our impact. So, final slide. Any questions? And some little helpers? Thank you, guys.
Do you have any questions, Commissioner O'Donnell?
I don't have any questions. I'll say this. I go back a long way with these folks. I sat on something called the Rate and Fee Committee back when we had one. I've watched them reluctantly come in to make price adjustments because they had to cover all operating expenses. There's times I've watched them defer for too many years and have to come in here and ask for something significant, only to be advised by this commission to get in here on a more normal basis so we don't have to get that experience. And as far as service providers in this city, I think they are exemplary. They have done a great job for this city. So I will have no problem with voting for this motion.
Okay.
So I move to approve unless...
Wait, there's a...
I didn't see any questions.
That's why we're making a motion. You're quite welcome.
I guess my only concern about this is, and I know this is not typical, I think these rates are too low. I think you should have asked for more. I mean, I just did a quick I'm not going to say it out loud, but I just did a quick calculation of what I pay, and I'm like, it's too low.
She's not up for re-election. That's what she's going to say.
I mean, we're getting a great deal for not very much, and I think, to me, the service is worth a lot more. So.
All right, so for the B&B folks in the room, you're hearing lots of kudos. I think we all recognize we love our garbage service. It seems to be working really well for the city. I just wanted to remind, I assume this includes, so I think in one of my report outs recently, I mentioned that Impact had received a presentation on the increase in rates and the changes based on legislation as far as the state managing recycling and that Metro had passed on an increase in rates. And I believe those rate increases already went into effect, I believe, this past July. So I assume I'm seeing shaking heads that this took all of that into consideration. So they're already absorbing rate increases that they're having to deal with. And I think it was our last work session, I mentioned that, or the one before.
I don't want to prohibit Mr. O'Donnell from making a motion and moving this along, but I guess I would have some questions maybe after that for Dante about some of the additional services. Obviously, I'm a big proponent of food waste recycling, and I was very supportive of that when we brought that up before, because I think it's absolutely necessary. But some of the other items that you had listed, I just have some questions about. So if that's okay after that, or should I just include it as, because it's not really part of this, it's the future services that I have some questions about.
You're wanting to continue a discussion after the vote? Or
about just
you're going
about
to take it
that.
offline?
No, I wanted to ask some questions about those specific items that aren't part of this motion while he's still here.
You can go ahead.
Go for it.
Okay, so go ahead and make the motion and then.
No, just continue with your questions.
Oh, okay.
I still have one more question,
Okay.
but I'd like for it to get
Okay,
going.
so we're talking about, so I'll paraphrase this by saying that I am well versed on recycling stuff. We get some recycling magazines at our house that I go through and look at. So my concern is, obviously I would love to see all styrofoam like banned forever, amen, because we can't recycle it. So what my concern is, okay, we start collecting it. I know of a couple of companies that I've heard about that are taking it and doing something else with it, but is that sort of on the horizon? I mean, not that we're doing it, but these other companies out there, where.
So there are other companies in the metro area that are picking up styrofoam and stuff like that, like the things that were listed, like batteries and things like that. We, with the county, have agreed that those items are solid waste. And we are working with the hauler to find a way to bring that program if we have a market in Oregon City. And we've been working with Alan and Pam. And if you saw in Exhibit A, there was a list of items that they would go into the home and get, and those were at a price cost. But we've been working at finding a viable option there, but that's in the future. That's not with this rate adjustment or anything like that.
I understand that.
Yes.
Yeah, I've known about the battery
Absolutely.
situation. I also am aware that for some reason, I guess people are dumping clothing in their garbage, and that is causing a major problem at the transfer station and the landfills.
They're dumping all those things in there right now.
Yeah, I know, and the electronics. I mean, there are options for electronics recycling.
I believe that batteries is where we will start.
We will start.
Yes, I believe that batteries is where we will start, and we'll see how that evolves. Also, there's state legislation that requires programs depending on how big your city is. So we'll see how all that evolves.
I was glad to see that at least a couple of the new businesses, the food carts they themselves have done this. They're not allowing their vendors to use styrofoam containers, which I think is fantastic. And I would dearly love to see a lot of our businesses get rid of them, because even though they're cheaper now, they cost a lot more later. So anyway, thank you so much for answering that.
You're welcome.
All right, any other questions or comments? I will say I learned a couple things through this presentation. The bulky items table that was in the letter that was provided by B&B to the city was addressed to you, Mr. Lewis, but I did not know that B&B would pick up file cabinets and treadmills and box springs and mattresses. I was shocked. I'm happily surprised. Now
At a reasonable price, too.
At a very reasonable price. Might make my husband upset. He's going to think I'm getting rid of more of his stuff. But
Those treadmills that are going to get disposed of after the holidays when people get bored with them.
yeah, I didn't know I could call them and then they would pick appliances. So anyway, if you don't know, I was informed. B&B does even more than just your regular garbage collection. So, and the prices are super reasonable, cheaper than me trying to find a truck to haul one of these things down to the site myself. So anyway, thank you. I was appreciative to learn more. And Commissioner O'Donnell, would you like to make your motion?
You're waiting for it, aren't you? I'm going to resist the temptation to include a provision in this that says you tape a $20 bill to your trash container every week. So I'm just going to simply move to approve resolution number 21-55, adjusting solid waste collection and disposal rates effective February 1st, 2022.
Motion's been made and seconded. Mr. Wiley?
Commissioner Denise McGriff. Aye. Commissioner Rocky Smith.
Aye.
Commissioner Adam Marl.
Aye.
Commissioner Frank O'Donnell.
Aye.
And Mayor Rachel L. Smith.
Aye.
Motion passes.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Dante. It's good to see you. We haven't seen you in like a year or more, so. Yep. Yeah, the food waste. All right, and thank you to B&B folks for coming in. I know you didn't say anything. You were waving at us and giving us thumbs up from the back of the room, so. All right, we're on to agenda item number 10. This is communications. Tony Conkle, City Manager.
Nothing tonight, thank you.
All right, is there anything from the commissioners? I'll go down the line. Commissioner McGriff?
I would like to strongly suggest, I don't know if it's required or not, but when we have boards and commissions that are meeting and that we have some of the members who are coming to the public virtually, I would like to see people have their cameras on. I think it's really important that if you are in a quasi-judicial position or you're in some sort of decision-making, that when you are in a public meeting, that you let the public see you.
I would agree with that. I mean,
That?
yeah.
I would really like, I mean, I'm hoping this is not going to be an imposition on somebody, but I recently went to a public meeting where I was testifying and half the members were not on screen. It was a little bit unnerving.
All right, any other communications? Commissioner Morrow?
Nope.
No. Commissioner Smith?
Just want to remind everybody that Saturday, December 4th, is the tree lighting, 4:30 to 6:30, Liberty Plaza.
Commissioner O'Donnell?
Come do it safely.
Yes, and I do not believe I have any communications for this evening. We will follow this meeting with an executive session as announced at the top of the agenda. And with that, we are adjourned.